The President must, as a matter of urgency and without further delay, relieve the Minister of Finance of his position. And appoint someone who is focused on national rather than self-interest and who has the requisite skill, experience, and knowledge of public financial management in his stead. The personal benefit that the current minister and his cronies derive from borrowing on our behalf through the commissions they take by their companies who serve as transaction advisors raises an unacceptable conflict of interest situation which must end immediately. It goes without saying that the economic management team, that solid team, has failed and must be reconstituted immediately with fresh ideas and perspectives. Having supervised the worst public debt buildup, the worst budget deficit, the worst debt to GDP ratio, the worst credit rating downgrades, and the worst performing currency in the world, the worst crisis of confidence in our economy, the highest fuel prices ever rising inflation, the worst ever rising inflation, unprecedented hardships, etc., the current head of the economic management team has clearly fallen from his ivory tower as a self-styled economic messiah to a poster boy for economic mismanagement. And his leadership of the economic management team is no longer tenable. He has lost sight of cause and effect relationship in the economic value chain and complains that our dire economic state is due to bad ratings from international agencies. He rather blames the agencies for our economic situation, rather than the fact that our dissipating economy resulted in those bad ratings. How does that assure Ghanaians his focus on the critical things that need to be addressed? The EMT has been bedeviled by their own ineptness, over-exuberance, and excessive focus on linear thinking of a theoretical cause and effect relationship, devoid of the practical influences of complex real-life nuances. In short, the economic management team assumed a laboratory experimental approach typically found in textbooks to run the extremely complex Ghanaian economy and analyze the impact of one variable at a time. Ladies and gentlemen, I've often said to people in most cases when you are analyzing the Ghanaian economy and an obvious simple solution comes to mind, think, and think again. The consequence of this lack of depth and experience complicated the problems of economic management with excessive yet costly experimentation that did not yield viable results. Alternatively, the President may want to consider appointing one of the mainly highly qualified Ghanaian public finance management experts to lead the economic management team. The third one, the President must, as a matter of urgency, reshuffle his cabinet. More than 5 years of an administration without a major cabinet reshuffle has calcified the management of the ministries, departments, and agencies. These MDAs and SOEs have become fiefdoms in which untouchable ministers and heads of agencies are now monarchs of all they survey. Yet they lack the energy, the passion, and ideas to turn these moribund situations around within the MDAs. Fresh ideas are needed. Morale is at a low in these ministries and agencies. The seriousness of the economic meltdown must compel government to unveil a clear and workable course of action emanating from broad-based thinking and consultation, rather than its current state of denial and wrong causal attributes. Such broad consultation must lead to a post-COVID economic recovery plan, a program that will focus our energies on building an economy whose fruits of growth will benefit all Ghanaians and give everybody a fair chance at success. The participants of this broad-based consultation must reflect the demographic, social, and economic status mix of our country. There must be a clear and measurable reduction in government expenditure. Even though this is not an easy course of action, but it's a necessary one. Nonetheless, I'll be the first to admit, after running an economy on 0% central bank financing in 2016. However, a crisis such as this requires drastic measures. I'm of the view that an open and transparent discussion of the true situation with the citizenry will help achieve this objective. The President must lead the way in the demonstration of prudence and modesty in the use of public resources. He must put an end to the ostentation and opulence and show sensitivity and respect for Ghanaians by using the presidential jet, which we acquired with taxpayers' money. And stop the rental of expensive chartered jets. Only then would he have led by the power of his example, to quote Bill Clinton. To enable Ghanaians to make meaning of the sacrifices he's making to get us out of the doldrums. The extravagance must give way to frugal application of public resources. We cannot live beyond our means and expect not to fall into debt and financial ruin. Related to this, and that's the sixth one, government must drastically cut down and trim down its size, rationalize and bring to reasonable level the pay packages of CEOs of SOEs and other senior public servants and heads of state organizations. The time has come to look at the practice of providing free utilities and allowances such as inconvenience allowance, entertainment allowance, and such other innovative allowances that are crafted just as income enhancers. The practice of setting up amorphous and poorly structured public agencies to run one-off ad hoc policies must also stop, and those already created must be merged with the more established and time-tested agencies already carrying out similar functions to curtail the needless duplication and waste. There must be a real effort to plug the loopholes that facilitate the unconscionable loss of public funds incurred through financial practices, as revealed by the Auditor General's report. Government must limit borrowing significantly. If we all agree that we are in an economic abyss, submerged under the suffocating weight of unsustainably high levels of debt and are at a risk of default, then the wisest thing to do is to limit borrowing. Government must, as a matter of urgency, issue a moratorium on all non-concessional borrowing to avoid an increase in our public debt. After the issuance of this moratorium, the dithering must stop and very urgent action must be taken to confront the debt problem. The stark reality is that in our current situation, it is just not possible to be servicing our debt at the present levels and have any significant resources left over to meet critical expenditure obligations. It is obvious that this government has no plan on how to handle the debt crisis. I note that government refused to take advantage of the Debt Service Suspension Initiative, commonly called DSSI, and the Common Platform for Debt Treatment beyond DSSI, because of the peculiar nature of Ghana's debt profile, where only about 20% is formed by multilateral and bilateral debt. The bulk of our debt is from international credit market and other commercial borrowers with default triggers related. It's easier related to bilateral and multilateral retrieves. Government clearly has two options open to it. The first will be to open a discussion with the multilateral finance partners and our creditors on a debt restructuring program, which will ease our debt burden and create some fiscal space to allow expenditure in critical sectors of the economy that are currently starved of funds. Rationalizing and enforcing strict compliance of our tax laws in areas such as the extractive sector, including a pragmatic legislation of the tax exemptions regime, can help improve resource flows. For example, a simple insistence that mining companies relay their export revenues into Ghana as per the relevant laws, rather than keeping such funds offshore, as is the current case, can help exchange rate stability. We must achieve a national consensus on these alternatives and take proactive steps as soon as possible. The longer we tarry, the worse the situation will get. While implementing these measures, government must adequately signal to the international finance providers a clear effort at meeting future obligations. Government must commit to using some of the windfalls that we earned from the recent rise in crude oil prices to revitalize the sinking fund that we left them in anticipation of future debt servicing. We estimate that the hikes in crude oil price will translate into an about 3 billion Ghana cedis, or about $550 million windfall for government this year. Part of this money must go into the sinking fund to build buffers for repayment of the 2025 maturing bonds. A contributing factor to the plummeting of investor confidence in our economy is the practice of underreporting and concealment of key economic indices like the budget deficit, public debt, and net international reserves. For instance, the Bank of Ghana must stop adding the proceeds of our Heritage Fund and other encumbered funds like Eurobond proceeds to our net international reserves to create a false sense that we have more buffers than we actually do. National data and economic indices should be a matter of fact and not subject to needless debate and contention. We cannot be debating the factual level of debt reserves, inflation, kilometers of roads constructed, whether they go from here to China, the number of schools and hospitals built, and whether CAPEX investments should include KVIPs, metric tonnage produced of food items. Ministers must not be contesting reports and data furnished to the public from their own outfits, and should not be comparing indices generated from rebase figures to figures prior to the rebasing. In effect, government data must be transparent and must give a true picture of our national situation. In addition, government must clarify reports which are rife in the investment community that it tends to use the heritage funds held in the United States as collateral to raise a $2 billion loan from a consortium of banks. We wish to serve notice that if this turns out to be true, we in the NDC will oppose it vigorously in the same way that we opposed previous deals. We cannot support the collateralization of every single source of future revenue just to finance today's consumption. This practice will deny future governments and future generations the opportunity to benefit from revenue streams accruing from funds which were originally intended to finance critical sectors of the economy. The Heritage Fund was set up purposely for the benefit of future generations, who we cannot saddle with debt and no heritage. To make certain that this practice doesn't become the order of the day, I'll propose the enhancement of legislation to stop the collateralization of statutory funds, because those funds are now being abused and their original purposes are being seriously hindered. It is obvious that the assumptions underlying the projections in the 2022 budget, especially regarding revenue, are overambitious and are unlikely to be achieved, considering all that has transpired since the presentation of the budget. Government must revert to more realistic targets and avoid creating further doubts in the minds of investors. Let me add that it is time to change the structure of our economy by allowing Ghanaians to achieve the popular General Achampong mantra of capturing the commanding heights of our economy. We must increase the GNP of our country as a share of our GDP. Otherwise, impressive GDP growth numbers are mostly the share of foreign investors and subject to repatriation at will. We must leverage our comparative advantage in agriculture by investing in agribusiness to complete the agricultural value chain in respect of marketing and processing of our agricultural products. These are some of the interventions government must adopt in earnest. This is not a time for political posturing and display of empty pride. We are staring down the cliff of economic collapse, and every day wasted winds down the clock further. Action needs to be taken now.